All right, hi, I'm David Draper. I'm an attorney with Lewis Thomason here in Knoxville. Today is March the 16th, 2022. We're here at the offices of Arnett, Draper, and Haygood, and I'm going to be interviewing Bill Sims, who is a longtime member of this firm and a very upstanding member of the Knoxville Bar Association. Bill, I'm supposed to commence this interview for posterity by asking you to state your full name and birthday.
Okay, I'll see if I can remember. William Arthur Sims, February 18, 1946.
And how many years have you practiced law?
50.
50 years.
50 in this month.
And as I understand it, you intend to retire very shortly.
Yes, I'm going to retire the middle part of next month, April.
Well, you've had a tremendous career, and I've been very honored to observe some of it from both near and afar. But let's begin by pointing out that we're here at Arnett, Draper, and Haygood in the Jack Draper conference room, which has some significance for me.
Yes.
And I know it does for you as well.
It does. It's ironic. This conference room is named after your father, Jack B. Draper, and I interviewed him for the History Project here some years ago in this conference room.
Well, I feel particularly honored to be able to conduct this interview, and we've obviously talked before today, and you've got some very interesting history to share with the members of our bar.
Well, I'm honored to have you interview me.
I'd like to sort of begin with you sharing with us something about your youth and your growing up. I know your father, like mine, was a lawyer.
Right.
And he was a significant influence on you, and you're ending up a lawyer. So I'll open that up for your sharing with us.
Well, a little bit of the family history. I was born in February 1946 in Lebanon, Tennessee, where my father was in Cumberland Law School at the time. And after he graduated, he got a job in Nashville, Tennessee, working for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Worked there for about a year, and then got another job. I can't remember what that was doing, and he worked there for 2 or 3 years, and then after I was about 4 years old, we moved to Fayetteville, which was his hometown, and that's where I grew up. And I went to grade school there at Robert E. Lee Grade School, went to high school at Central High School, and then after I graduated from high school, I went to the University of the South at Sewanee, Tennessee, which was about 60 miles from Fayetteville. My grandfather was a lawyer and the county judge of Lincoln County for 32 years. That's the longest that anyone has ever served in that capacity. My father was a lawyer, of course, and he also was the first General Sessions judge in Lincoln County, Tennessee. And then he practiced with his dad and his brother, Robert W. Sims, and they all practiced together until my grandfather passed away, and then my dad and his brother had Sims and Sims Law Firm there. Fayetteville was a very small town. Everybody knew everybody, like in all the little country towns. Everybody went to church with somebody they knew, you know. It was a great place to grow up.
Talk with me for a second about your coming to learn of your dad's profession and what it involved. You had shared with me a story about, I believe he may have taken you to court, or you had an encounter with a judge at an early age.
Yeah, I had a couple of experiences. When he was General Sessions judge, sometimes the county deputies or the state troopers would come by and they would want to get a warrant issued for someone's arrest. And I remember standing in the front yard with my dad one night while he was talking to some troopers. And of course, I was a little guy, and the trooper was a big, tall fella, and I was standing where my face came right even with his pistol. And as we stood there, all I could do was look at that pistol, and he looked down and saw me and said, "Hey, boy, you like that?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." He said, "Well, here, I'll let you hold it." And he took it out, took the bullets out of the chamber, handed it to me. And I stood there and played with this pistol for a while. That was one thing that I remember about my dad practicing law. You mentioned something else. And
There was, I believe you shared with me that there was.
Picking a jury.
Right.
That was it, picking a jury. Dad took me one time over to the courthouse. I was about 5 or 6 years old at that point. I've forgotten what circuit Lincoln County was in, but of course you had a circuit judge that would travel around to several different counties and serve and hold court in several different counties. And when they did that, of course, they had to pick a jury in each county. And the method that this judge used to pick juries, he would have a small child come over, and he would have the names of the jury potential jurors in a box, and he would ask the kid to reach in there and pick out the names of potential jurors. And of course he would pick out maybe 50 out of 100 or something like that, and that would be the jury pool. Well, Dad took me over one time and introduced me to the judge that was serving that time, and the judge explained to me what he wanted me to do, and I did it. And when I got through, he said, "Well, thank you very much, young man." Said, "Here's your pay." And he handed me a silver dollar. Boy, and I thought, man, a dollar was a lot of money back then. And so we start going back over to Dad's office, and I've got the silver dollar in my hand, and I'm looking at it. He said, "Son, that's your first legal fee." And I had a necklace made with that silver dollar in the necklace, and I have donated that to my wife. Okay. And so she wears my first legal fee.
You still have it?
I still have it.
Or she has it?
She has it.
All right. Well, now, something occurred to me. We would be remiss if we didn't maybe touch on your mother. I will share with you that I'd like to think I got a little bit of my dad's brains and more of my mother's fire. And so, tell me about your mom.
Okay. My mom was a great mother. She was a housewife. She was a stay-at-home mother. She took care of the house. She washed the clothes. We didn't have a dryer back then. We hung them up on the clothesline out back, and you had clothespins that you used to clip them on there. And I can remember Mother washing the clothes and then going out there and hanging them up all across the clothesline. She just did everything that was expected of a wife and mother back at that time. And I know that it really wasn't like this, but it seems to me, according to my recollection, that she cooked every meal we ate. But we had cooked meals a lot at night. On Sundays, we would usually have roast beef and mashed potatoes and carrots.
All right. Well, that sounds like a very solid home life that you were exposed to in your youth.
I had a great home life. Both my parents were very good. They had rules, but they weren't domineering. And if you got out of line, as boys do, if I was home with Mother and I acted up or something, she'll say, "Son, if you do that again, I'm going to tell your daddy when he comes home tonight." Well, I didn't want Daddy to have to hear about what I had done, so that corrected that a lot of the times. We got spanked back then. You know, they can't do that now, but that was very common back then. And I got spanked quite a few times, but they were just great parents, both of them.
Let's pivot to your going to college. Tell me about your college experience, undergraduate.
Okay. Went to the University of the South at Swanee, Tennessee from 1960 to 1964. And at that time, it was an all-male school. It has since traveled on, and now it's a co-ed school, but it was all male at that time. It was kind of a different kind of environment. It was a little elitist, I must say. We saw ourselves as better than most colleges.
Well, it's a school with a very strong history, and
Yeah.
it's in an idyllic setting on a mountaintop.
Up there all by itself.
Yeah.
That's all there is up there. But it was a great place to go to school. All you had to do was study. I mean, there wasn't anything else to do. It was just a very, there was a, I don't know how to put it, an attitude among the students that, hey, we're going to Swanee. This is the best place in Tennessee, the best place in the country.
Any particular professor stand out in your mind from your undergraduate experience?
Well, I had a political science professor. I can't remember his name. He was one of the younger professors, but I majored in poli-sci, and I took a lot of courses under him. And he was very good at talking to the students and kind of making you listen and be interested in what he was telling you. I can't remember his name, I'm sorry.
Well, but let's think about this for a second. You're down there at Sewanee between 60 and 64. Mm-hmm. There's an awful lot going on in the world at that time, and yet you're on a pretty remote, isolated campus.
Yes.
But you had to have been aware of a lot of big things going down during that period. Everything from the Cuban Missile Crisis to Kennedy's assassination to the opening of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And there you are at Sewanee.
Yeah. We weren't, out in the woods, so to speak, but we were withdrawn more than the usual college student. I joined the ROTC when I was at Swanee because I thought that would be a good way to keep me out of going to Vietnam. It was the Air Force ROTC. And boys in college during that period of time were always worried about getting drafted. And if you were in the ROTC, that gave you a deferment.
Okay.
Now you had when you graduated, you had to do some payback. You had to go and serve
Right.
in whatever service that you were a member of the ROTC in. But I was in the ROTC. I stayed in it until my junior year when I hurt my back. And I thought that was going to give me a 4F deferment.
All right.
So I just assumed that, and I quit ROTC, and that was in April
Of what year?
of 67. No, of 63.
63.
63. So I get out of school at the end of that semester, and I go home, and I hadn't been home in May very long until I get a notice to appear at the bus station in Fayetteville to be shipped to some fort, I guess it's Fort Donaldson, right outside of Nashville. Is that up in Kentucky?
I don't know.
I think it was Fort Donaldson in Kentucky. But anyway, I had to show up with everybody else that was being called to the draft, and we rode to Nashville. Fortunately, I had a letter from a doctor who had treated me for my back injury that said that I was unfit for military service.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky. I took that with me. And when I went through the line, I showed them the letter, and they looked at it like, okay, get out of here, you know. But I avoided Vietnam.
Wow.
And that was something everybody worried about.
Well, sure. All right, so let's move forward to law school.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about how you ended up at Tennessee.
Well, I applied at several different schools. I applied at the University of Virginia. That was one place that I was really interested in going. I liked UT. I mean, I didn't know anything about it. I'd never gone to school here, but I thought, you know, it's the University of Tennessee, and I'm going to practice law in Tennessee. You know, this would be good. I applied at Cumberland University, which was where my dad was going to school in Lebanon at the time, but then it moved later to Birmingham, Alabama.
Right.
So I applied down there. Well, long story short, I didn't get in UVA. I did get accepted at UT, so I came here.
Okay. All right.
And I think I said that I was at Swanee from 60 to 64. Actually, it was 64 to 68. And then I graduated in 68 from Swanee and came to UT in 68.
Okay. All right. Okay, so now you find yourself on a large flagship state campus,
Yep.
which had a lot of activity during that period.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of student protests.
Yep.
An awful lot of things going on, and you're in the midst of that. Share with us what that was like.
Well, it was kind of, that's them, and I'm over here in law school.
Okay.
My whole time here at the University of Tennessee was focused just on the law school. I lived in an apartment which was down the street from the law school on Cumberland Avenue. I didn't have a car. I walked back and forth to school. But I spent my whole day at the law school, either going to class or after classes in the library studying for the next day.
Okay.
And I started co-oping. The University of Tennessee had a co-op program with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, down in Huntsville, Alabama. And so I got into that co-op program in about the last year of my attendance at law school. And I would go to school a quarter and then co-op a quarter. And I went through that about a year or a year and a half, and that helped me pay for my last year of college.
Okay, we talked about this before. This, of course, is during the space program
Yeah.
of the 60s.
Yep,
And you find yourself as a young law student in Huntsville
yep.
at
In the law department.
Marshall Space Flight Center.
Marshall Space Flight Center.
And you're actually looking at contracts from companies that are supplying materials to the space program.
Exactly. We would, I don't remember everything we did now, but we had a little training when we came in there. And there was another student from the University of Alabama who was co-oping, and we got to be friends. And we would work together, but they would assign us research on all kinds of different things, procurement questions and so forth. And I don't remember everything that we did, but I know that it was kind of complicated. And we would have to, sometimes we would have to do research on actual case law.
Right.
And things like that. But it was a good experience outside of law school.
Yeah.
I was
Applying what you're learning.
applying what I was learning. Exactly.
Let's talk about how you ended up here at this firm, because you shared a little story with me about your first encounter
Yeah.
with Foster Arnett.
it's an amazing story. It's a miracle, really. I was in law school. I've been in law school a little over 2 years, and so I was in my last year of law school, and the law school and the KBA, the Knoxville Bar Association, co-sponsored some kind of dinner, and they were going to have speakers there that could talk to the law students, from the bar and so forth. And so it was in the building across the street from the law school. There was kind of a cafeteria in there, and it was pretty large, had a lot of space. And so I got there kind of late that night, and I came in, and there was one table left, had 3 or 4 seats left. So I sat down at one table, and I was there with some other people. And in about 5 minutes, I look over my shoulder, and here comes 2 people coming to the table, and it's Foster Arnett and his wife, Jean Arnett. And he says, "Does anybody have these seats?" I said, "No." He said, "Could we sit here?" I said, "Well, sure." So they sat down, and of course, Mr. Arnett immediately engages everybody at the table in conversation. But he found out I was in law school, and he started talking to me about that and what I was doing and so forth. And at one point he said, "Have you ever thought about being a law clerk?" And I said, "Yeah, I've thought about that. I would like to do that." And he said, "Well, we just happen to be looking for a clerk. If you're interested in clerking for our firm, you need to get together your resume and get me your grade transcript from school, and you need to get me at least 3 recommendations, and bring me all of that, and submit your application for employment at our firm, and we'll consider you." Consider me. Well, I got to work. Of course, it wasn't too hard to get your grades and your transcripts and all that kind of stuff. It was a little difficult to get 3 recommendations, but I told my dad about it, and he said, "I know a lawyer in Pulaski that's a good friend with Foster Arnett." He said, "I can get you 1 recommendation." So he did, and I brought all that in a package and brought it up to Mr. Arnett and handed it to him. And I remember him sitting there looking at it and everything and asking me a few questions. And he said, "Now, Bill, we'll consider your application. I want you to know that we can't guarantee you anything except an opportunity." I said, "Okay, Mr. Arnett." So in a couple of weeks, I heard from him. They offered me the job. I took the job. That was in June of 1971.
Right.
I graduated from law school in December of 1971. Took the bar exam in February of 72, passed, and got admitted to practice law in Tennessee in March of 1972.
You practiced for a time with this firm in the former location,
Hamilton Bank Building.
the Hamilton National Bank Building,
Yeah,
which is now condominiums.
yeah.
But in those days, that was as I recall, it was a coal-heated building. Maybe it had been converted to oil.
I think
don't
so.
know.
Yeah, yeah. There were a lot of law firms in that building.
I remember that office where Dad would take us on Saturdays.
Yeah.
And shooing us into the evidence room to play with exhibits. And there was a skeleton in there that always sort of spooked me a little bit, that was used, I guess, in medical malpractice cases. But so you graduate law school and find yourself practicing with, I guess, what could be fairly termed some titans of the bar. Foster
Exactly.
Arnett.
Exactly. The whole firm, Arnett, Draper, and Haygood, had an excellent reputation among the bar. And at that time, when I came with them, they had 2 other young lawyers. There was Arnett, Draper, and Haygood, and then there was a lawyer who is still practicing, Tom Scott.
Yep.
and another lawyer who I think is still practicing, Lewis Foster.
Right.
Okay, and when I came aboard, I was number 6. And so that was in 71, and I got my license on March the 25th, 1972, and started, quote, practicing. And then in 1981, we moved down here to this building.
All right, so talk to me about some of your first experiences in the courtroom.
Well, back then, we represented a lot of insurance companies. And back then, insurance companies would let senior lawyers who had the primary responsibility for a case take younger lawyers with them to court to help the senior lawyers. And they might, cross-examine one witness or something like that, but they would be there to take notes and to help the older lawyer with exhibits and things like that.
Yeah.
And my first experience with regard to jury cases was working with Mr. Arnett. He was my mentor, and I was his aide. And he would get me involved in cases he was working on, and I can't remember any specific ones back that long ago, but we would go down and I would get to see him cross-examine witnesses. I would get to see him argue issues with other lawyers, get to see him work with the judge when the judge would be asking questions. And then I would get to see him make the closing argument to the jury and how he interfaced with the jury and talked to them and identified himself with the jury. And it was just a real learning experience. And then my other experiences back then, especially for firms that represented insurance companies would have a lot of subrogation cases where they would send you a subrogation case. Their insured would get involved in a car accident and his car would get damaged, and they would pay him under his policy for his car, and then they would sue the other party to try to recover that. And young lawyers like me got the subrogation cases because you went down to Sessions Court and you tried it non-jury. And the saying was, take it to Sessions Court, or take it to Sessions Court, and if you don't get a good result, then take it to court.
There you go.
And you would appeal it to circuit court.
You made a comment when we talked previously about, and maybe this was something that your dad shared with you, that lawyering is a people business, a person business. And by that I recollect that you were referring to the need to be able to relate to the parties or witnesses in a way that enables an effective pursuit of evidence, I guess. Talk with me about that.
Okay. What my dad told me was, he said, son, you're going to find out as you begin practicing law that the practice of law is the practice of people.
Okay.
And I learned, sure enough, in every case, what he was talking about. You've got to deal with your clients. They're people. And you've got to have a good relationship with them, but you can't just let a client tell you what to do, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. I mean, it's their case, and your job is to give them advice and give them counsel, but when they get out of line, it's also your job to try to draw them back in line.
Right.
Not only that, you deal with the party on the other side. You'll end up taking his deposition or her deposition at some point in time. And some people, it's hard to depose them without getting crosswise with them. But I always found that the best way to handle the opposing witness was to start out and be courteous to them, call them Mr. or Mrs., introduce yourself. I'm here to ask you questions. If I ask you a question you don't understand, you let me know and I'll repeat it. Okay. And start out not trying to berate them because they're the other party, but trying to intermix with them and let them come to trust you in a way. I mean, they're never going to think you're the good guy because their lawyers telling them you're the bad guy, but try to lighten that prospective thought some. And then witnesses. You want a witness to like you if there's any way that you can arrange for that to happen. And so you've got to deal with them so that they respect you and like you, and hopefully they'll make better witnesses for you than the other way around. And the same thing with picking a jury. I would tell my clients when we go down to court, okay, now you need to understand, we're going to present this case to the jury, and the jury is going to decide. This is theater. We're the actors. The other party and his lawyer are actors. They're watching our show, and they're going to be watching us from the time we walk in with everything we do. And so be careful how you look. Be careful how you talk. If somebody says something on the witness stand that you don't agree with, don't just shake your head and go crazy, you know, because the jury will see that and they will interpret that, and they may not interpret it accurately.
Yep.
And so I learned as I practiced longer and longer that's what my dad was talking about the practice law is the practice of people. It's dealing with people and learning how to do that in a way that gets the best result possible for your client.
Let me ask you to talk with us about, we had mentioned, or we had shared previously, discussed previously, a very significant case you had, an aviation case, and a lot of experiences that came out of that. But I'd like you to just talk for a minute about that trial.
Okay. It was the hardest case that I've ever had for several reasons. One, there were tons of facts that had to be investigated and gone into. And it was a case where a man and his mother-in-law took off from the airport over here at Island Home Airport, where he had had his plane parked for about a week. They flew to Hilton Head, South Carolina, where the man's wife and his mother-in-law's daughter and the children and grandchildren were down there waiting at the airport for them when they flew in. And as they're flying in, different witnesses saw different things. Some witnesses said they saw smoke coming out of the engine. Some witnesses said it looked like steam. But anyway, as they flew into the airport, smoke or steam started coming out, and the plane veered like this and went down and crashed into a power line and caught on fire, and both the husband and the grandmother were killed. Mm-hmm. And the mother and the children witnessed the accident. It was a very complicated lawsuit. One of the best lawyers in Knoxville at the time represented the plaintiffs.
Okay.
And we had to go through a lot of discovery. Had to take a lot of depositions. We had to take a lot of expert depositions. They sued my client, who was one of the fixed-based operators here at the Knoxville airport at the time, and said that they had worked on the plane about 2 or 3 weeks before the crash and claimed that they did something wrong.
Okay.
We were able to show through our experts that what happened was that the pilot, the father, did not properly check his sump pumps on his plane. Water can get inside a gas tank and it can condensate and just fill up.
Right.
And so you've got to drain your sump pumps before you take off. And we were able to show that he didn't check them and didn't drain them, and that as he was coming into the airport, what you would normally do, the good operating procedures would be you would switch from the tank you flew down there on to another full tank in your aircraft.
Right.
And that's what he did, and when he did, water spewed out instead of gas.
Okay. Killed the engines.
The first time we tried that lawsuit, we got a mistrial because we tried it for about 3 days. My client walked out to smoke a cigarette during a break, and one of the jurors, a young lady, walked up to him and asked him if he would light her cigarette, and he did. And the other side saw them talking. And I don't think things were going too good for him at that time, and they came in and brought it to the judge's attention, and he granted a mistrial. The second time, we tried that lawsuit for 9 days, and we got a defense verdict. I had a expert witness who had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in aviation. He didn't get it, but he was nominated for it. And they had an expert who was famous around here in this area for being kind of a hired gun. And he had
What, an expert as a hired gun? Seriously?
Sure. I take it you've had one or two before. Anyway, he had a very high opinion of himself. And I was cross-examining him in the trial, and I said, now, Mr. Jones, that wasn't his name, Mr. Jones, you would agree with me, would you not, sir, that experts in the same area can disagree among themselves about certain matters? And he looked at me and said, anybody that disagrees with me in this case is incompetent. I looked at the jury. I said, excuse me, what did you say? He said, anybody that disagrees with me is incompetent. Well, when it came time for me to argue to the jury, I said, here's my expert. He's nominated for the Nobel Prize in aviation. Didn't get it, but he was nominated for it. He's incompetent because he disagrees with this guy. And the jury just grinned. They caught on to what was going on. But that was the hardest and the longest case I've ever tried. First time we prepared for it, it took us 33 days. Took me 33 days to prepare for that case. When it got mistried and then we tried it again, it took me 30 days. I cut it down to 30 days the second time. But
Bill, let me ask you to share some reflections on this thought. When you began your practice in the early 70s, there was no such thing as mediation.
that's right.
And in this day and age, it's about all there is. Very little trial work. You've seen that phenomenon come on and, I guess for lack of a better word, mature.
Yeah.
You've served as a mediator for many, many people. What would you share with young lawyers about mediating and effectively mediating?
Well, mediation has a lot to recommend itself. If you can mediate a case and settle it without having to go to trial, first of all, it takes you less time to get through with the case. You can get it over with. Second of all, it usually takes you less money to prepare the case for trial. You hopefully can avoid taking some expert witness depositions or taking fact witness depositions. And you know, sometimes, especially if you're taking doctor's depositions and you can avoid that, it can save you quite a bit of money. Now, having said that, you don't want to not take any depositions before mediation, because then people just come and argue about what's the doctor going to say or what's this witness going to say.
Mm-hmm.
So you do need to pin down some of the facts. And thirdly, the most important thing about mediation and why it has become so popular, in my opinion, is if the parties can go to a mediation, and if they can jointly compromise and work toward the middle. It doesn't mean 50% in the middle,
Yeah.
but if both sides can compromise and work toward a resolution of the matter and get it settled, then you have decided how the case comes out. If you don't do that and you go to trial, the jury will decide how the case is going to come out. And any lawyer that's tried several lawsuits, I don't care how many he's tried or how old he is, can vouch for the fact that sometimes you go down to try a lawsuit and you think you may win and you lose. And sometimes you can go down and think your lawsuit is a bad one and you've got a real hard work ahead of you and you win. You don't ever know what a jury's going to do in deciding the believability of witnesses and so forth. So that's one thing about mediation that has made it popular among parties and lawyers. But I think there's one thing else among lawyers that's made it popular, and I think most lawyers won't admit this, but there is a degree of anxiety that maybe even depression that goes with preparing a lawsuit for trial. You have to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and you have to try to anticipate everything that's going to happen at trial, and you have to know all the facts. And there's a lot of work, and then no matter how hard you work, when you go down as a lawyer and present your party's case, you don't ever know what a jury's going to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And that creates a lot of anxiety in a good lawyer. I mean, if you're a lawyer and you don't care whether you win or lose, you're just going to go down and flip the lawsuit out on the wall and see what sticks, it probably doesn't cause you any anxiety, but most lawyers are not like that.
Well, and interestingly, I recall you commented on this. It's the lawyer preparing the case in a way that causes the other side anxiety,
Exactly.
which is what leads to compromise.
Exactly. The more thorough you can be when you're taking depositions, the more questions you can ask that either leaves the other side thinking, why did he ask that question? Does he know something we don't know? Or the better you can do in taking the deposition of an expert, either for you or against you, where you either lay out on the table the expert's testimony that is going to show that your side's going to win, or whether you rip the other guy's expert apart, showing that he's going to lose, then that makes them want to try to get the case settled.
We're approaching the top of the hour. I want to ask you, you are sitting here in this conference room on the backside of a 50-year career in the law. You've seen an awful lot. I can only imagine that there are some thoughts that swirl through your mind as you kind of close this chapter and prepare to transition to the next. But share with the viewers your reflections on 50 years of practicing law
Well,
whether you do anything differently.
I can't think of anything specifically, but I'm sure there's 100 things that I would do differently. I have had a blessed career. I mean, just the uniqueness of how I met Mr. Arnett, how that led to me coming to practice as an associate with their firm, and how I was able to become a partner and then work with the other partners and associates that came behind me. I have led a blessed life in terms of my association with this firm. It has a stellar reputation in the community. It certainly did back then when I first came, and I think that we have maintained that. So I have been very lucky and very privileged to have practiced with Arnett, Draper, and Haygood. I have tried, coming from a family of lawyers, the honor of the profession and maintaining the honor of the profession is something that's always been very important to me. And so I have tried my best. None of us are perfect, so I may have messed up somewhere along the line, but I can't think of anything that's too bad. But I have tried to do my best to practice law in a competent and courteous fashion, and to always do what is right, not even if you get pressure from your client not to do something, or to do something that you know is not right. I had a client one time, it was a case involving a piece of equipment, and my client was the manufacturer of the equipment, and they had some design drawings. And as a part of the discovery process, the plaintiff asked for them to produce all their design drawings. Well, there was one set of design drawings that wasn't perfect, shall we say. It was problematic. And they wanted to withhold those and not produce them. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. We got to produce it. Well, they fired me, which relieved my anxiety quite a bit. And they got him another lawyer, and I don't know what he did. But your word is worth gold if you can maintain your reputation for honesty and integrity. And even with people that are on the other side of your lawsuit, I've made friends with a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers who have sued my clients. Yeah. In that aviation case that I was telling you about, that lawyer and I became very good friends after that lawsuit, because we worked each other to death, and we formed a bond.
Right.
And so just because another lawyer is on the other side and represents the plaintiff and you represent the defendant doesn't mean that you've got to be ugly to them, or doesn't mean that you've got to go for blood. It just means you've got to do what is right.
And that's never changed.
Never changed.
And I can assure you, having observed your career, or a lot of it, you certainly upheld the standard.
I hope so. I've tried to do my best.
Anything else you'd like to offer in this interview?
I'm talking like an old man now, because Mr. Arnett used to talk like this when I first started practicing with him. Things have changed since I started practicing law. And some things need to change back to the old ways. People used to come to the office on Saturdays a lot back when I first started practicing law. And my impression is that's kind of eroding away. And I know you've got to have a life. Yeah. But if you're going to be a lawyer, you're also going to have clients, and you owe your clients your due diligence in every case.
Yeah.
It's
Let me ask you this. We live in an age of email,
yeah,
and we find ourselves emailing, sometimes quite foolishly putting things in emails because we start typing before we start thinking.
yeah.
The good old-fashioned phone call, or better yet, the meeting in person, rarely occurs.
No, lawyers used to have lunch together
Yeah.
and talk about cases, or you definitely have a phone call. Now that a phone call can be just like an email. In emails, people sometimes don't. It's like they're not talking to anybody because they're not face to face, and so they're not careful what they say. But you get on a phone call, sometimes some lawyers wouldn't practice the civility aspect of practicing law, and they'd get really upset on a phone call. And that can be bad. That can be real bad. Every case is different, and you've got to have some limits, but you don't want to draw a line unless you have to.
Yeah. Well, your comments about being courteous and professional with the litigants and the witnesses is so critically important. And we've just come out of the pandemic where
Are
law
we out of
offices-
it?
Well, yeah, we are. I hereby declare it.
Okay.
But the courts got shut down, law offices got shut down, and now there's talk about everybody maybe just practicing remotely, and yet I hear you talk about the importance of connecting with people. That's the polar opposite.
Yeah.
How can you practice law effectively, as a trial lawyer anyway, remotely?
I don't think you can.
Well, it's an interesting thought process.
Yeah.
I guess I probably agree with you, but what I think is not important. In any event, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you, David.
It's been a joy to be able to do it, and you're moving on to your next chapter, and I'm sure you're going to uphold that as well. So thank you so much.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you.